be a small, intimate group today. Before Jim starts, I am going to do a song called Meet Me by the Water. I thought it was appropriate because we are going to be talking about the Silver Lake area. So we're going to be around the water. So I thought I'd start with a song. Way, way, hey, ha, way, hey, ha, way, ho, way, ho. Way, way, hey, ha, way, hey, ha, way, ho, way, ho. Way, oh, way, hey, hi, oh, way, hi, oh. Way, oh, way, hey, oh. Na kwesh kedari dai kobiyan, the bed big nagamoyan. Na kwesh kedari dai kobiyan, a mega big ye we geyan. Gewabaman mashkane wabakizik bibikizis apachi bago sendemam. Way, way, hey, ha, way, hey, ha, way, ho, way, ho, way, oh, way, hey, ha, ho, way, hi, oh, way, oh, way, oh. I'd like to present Jim Paquette.
Big much. Okay, today, it's going to be today. No, it doesn't bother me that there's a small crowd. It could be one, because even if there's 100 people, I only talk to one person. So I always, so it's always going to be the same. And I know he's filming this over here, so we're going to actually got a larger audience than you think here. I'm going to have to figure out, you can watch the screen up there. Whoop, look at there. I ripped it off. Hang on here, I'll get it. How's that? I'll sit here, but watch the screen here. What I'm going to be talking about today is, the title, of course, is We Have Always Been Here, and it's discovering the ancient caribou hunters of Silver Lake. And I could talk about this for the next 8 days, okay, let alone just, for an hour or so here. So we're going to be covering a lot of information here. And so I'm going to sort of, run through this kind of quick. But time's going to go by fast here. But it was back in 1984 that I personally set out as an Anishinaabe, a Métis Paquette family member, to prove that my own indigenous ancestors have lived here in the upper Great Lakes region since the end of the last ice age, and that was over 12,000 years ago. And I was inspired by this particular guy right here, who was my grandpa Paquette. And my grandpa was Anishinaabe, Iroquois. He called himself French Indian. Okay, that's how he referred to himself, as a French Indian. But today he would be called Métis. Okay, these are, and his family was originally, his Anishinaabe family is originally from Michigan here, but they were displaced into Canada. But his father and mom moved back into the Upper Peninsula, and so they weren't members of any registered members of any tribe here in Michigan, although that's really where they're from originally. But he inspired me a lot. I wanted to know. I didn't have the advantage, if you will, of being a member of a recognized tribe. And even though I grew up in a very traditional indigenous family, in a sense, a Métis family, I still had a lot of questions as growing up as a child as to, who am I? Who are my ancestors? And of course, it was something that was a passion with me growing up. And what I did was I just turned to reading everything I could possibly read about the native peoples that lived here in the upper Great Lakes, and then throughout North America. I studied them. And one of the things I did as I grew older, I really began to take a real keen interest in what archaeology tells us about the past people that lived here in the Great Lakes region. And one of the things that I found and this was when I was getting older, when I was going to Northern, going to college and later, one of the things that I found when I was doing all of my research and I was reading all these professional journals, there was this, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan was what we call an archaeological donut hole, because there was all these archaeological sites that were found in Wisconsin, up in Minnesota, all the way around in Ontario, around Lake Superior, and of course down in lower Michigan as well. And yet there was nothing ever really, very, very little that was ever written or reported about from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan that dated back into what we'd call prehistoric times. And when I asked a professional archaeologist as to why was that, what I was told was, well, that's because there's nothing here. There's nothing here. And I said, there's nothing here? I said, well, there's stuff all over. He said, well, if there was something here, somebody would have found it. And that was back in the 80s, and I thought, I really thought that was kind of the wrong answer. And I thought, what I decided to do then was to go out myself and to try to find if there was things out there. Because I thought, well, maybe the reason you didn't find anything was because you never looked. And so I began what truly was a spirit quest. And it began on my birthday on May 12, 1984, and I decided that I was going to go out for myself and see if I could find any traces of the early peoples that lived here in the Negaunee area. And I went across, if you've ever been, I'm sure you all know where Teal Lake is there, but overboard and Bluffs are on the opposite side of the lake is where I decided to concentrate my efforts, because that whole area was relatively undisturbed. You know, there was no housing or anything else there that had destroyed so much on the other parts of the lake. And when I went there, I wouldn't even call myself an amateur archaeologist at the time, because I really didn't know, I hadn't done any field work, and although I'd studied archaeology, I hadn't really didn't know how to really do field work per se. But I was really good with a metal detector. I was one of them nerds that you see down along the beach looking for coins and such, and I was really good with it. And I knew that people that lived here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and up in the Upper Great Lakes, that the people that lived here had been using copper for the last 7,000 to 8,000 years. And so I knew that if I could find a penny in a park, that it would be fairly easy if there was at any time in the last numerous thousand years, that if anybody had been living on the lake and had dropped and had left behind a copper artifact per se, that I'd be able to locate it with that metal detector right there. And that's what I did. And lo and behold, within the first half hour I just went around the end of the lake, went up over towards the quartzite bluffs there, and when I got down into some nice little flat areas that looked like they would have been great for camping, the place was loaded with artifacts. And there was lots of copper, okay, and these are copper artifacts these right here this was a buried cache of just hammered native copper. And this would have been copper that would have been probably mined in the copper country, but it was carried here, and this is the things that they would use then to make knives, to make spear points, to make other types of tools. And there was copper on the site in numerous places. And you can see here, there's a copper knife, there's a copper spear point, and then there's this incredible copper artifact that you see there's called a pike. And it was probably used, it could have been used as an ice spud. It could have been actually used as a tool for prying those copper blanks and stuff, you know, out of the rock in the copper country by ancient miners. But there was also other things. Wherever I looked, I just was surface collecting, and I was just walking down the trails that the people had made through the years. You think that the trails on Teal Lake are probably from the last couple hundred years. Well, actually those trails date back thousands of years. And so they're worn into the ground. And as I walked along the trails, you can see here this beautiful quartz small arrowhead that was laying next to this acorn thing here. That was laying right in the trail. Everybody had walked over it. They never even saw it. And I'm thinking, well, no wonder nobody's found anything. They never really looked for it. All they got to do is look down. And I also found a lot of, what I discovered was that those big bluffs that you see over there, it's called agibic quartzite. That was a favored raw material for people that were living throughout the Upper Great Lakes region. When you go back to 5, 6, 7, 8 to 10,000 years, that was a favored raw material for making their stone tools. And I know they look like, one of the reasons nobody picked up these things because they look just like a rock, okay? But if you know what you're looking at, it just jumps out at you. These are just actual quartzite flakes and such that were modified and used for cutting and for scraping and for just doing, any number of jobs. Now, one of the things that was really stood out on the north shore of Teal Lake was the vast quantities of fire-cracked rock. And fire-cracked rock's called FCR. It's one of the most common artifacts you're ever going to find on any ancient site. That's because people cooked with rock, and they heated them. They heated their places with rock. So rock was obviously used for a lot of things with fire. But as you heat rock, it cracks and it breaks in some very specific ways. And so it's easy to recognize when you know what you're looking at and you're looking for. And the trails over there on the north shore of the lake over there were just littered with this, and plus there was pavements of this quartzite rock that had been used in fire pits. And if you want to know why, they found the same thing on Grand Island. Archaeologists that were working out on Grand Island found exactly what we found on Teal Lake. And this Fernanda Neubauer, who worked on the site, did a study of all of this fire-cracked rock to try to determine what were they doing, why were there these pavements of fire-cracked rock. And what she did, they did a thing called lipid residue study on this fire-cracked rock. And what they found out that what people were doing back then was that they were processing acorns. Because there was, all it was all these oak trees. And if you go on the north shore of Teal Lake, you're going to see the same thing. It's all oak trees over there. And so for probably thousands of years, people had set up their campsites on the north shore of that lake, and not only to hunt and to fish and to do other things, but one of the things that they did over there was they were processing acorns, okay? And so that's a big deal. Now, in 1985, after I registered the site and told the state of Michigan it was here, and I was able to secure funding from the Negaunee Historical Society and through NMU, where they financed an archaeological dig over there. So for the very first time, a professional archaeologist was going to come to the site. It was Marla Buckmaster from NMU, was going to come to the site and oversee this excavation, the first excavation ever of a site here in Marquette County. And what we found was, they found a lot of some incredible things that they located during the excavation. And these are just a couple of the things here. But what these artifacts, the stone artifacts, the copper artifacts, look, you see copper tools, those are things that date to around maybe 4, 5, 6,000 years ago. But the nut processing that they were able to carbon date things on Grand Island, and they found out that also was that old. It's thousands of years old. But the stone tools themselves that were found over there look to be what they call early archaic or Paleo-Indian, which dates way back, even older than what some of the other artifacts were. And that would make sense because people would have been living there for centuries. Okay, they'd have been camping here, then they left, they came back, they left, and so they're moving around. But it would be what they call it's what we would call a multi-component site. In other words, for thousands of years, people lived in that one area. Now, what I did was after the excavation, I thought, and after this project was over, and I kept my mouth shut as to where things were until we did our work there. I knew this was big news because nobody had ever found anything like this. And again, the archaeologists were saying, well, there's nothing in the UP. And I'm thinking, baloney. So what I wanted to do was to educate the public, but also to prove to the professional world that there were people living here for thousands and thousands of years, unlike what they were telling their students in academia. And so I did this, Renee Prusi actually wrote this, one of her first articles, this is years ago. If you know Renee, you know that just made the front page of the Mining Journal, of course. And what it was that it screamed for the first time that we were here, okay? And that was so important to me to do that. Now, that my Spirit Quest, that was just the very beginning. And in 1985, that's Marla Buckmaster sitting there. We're on that rock outcropping on Teal Lake, and that's Dr. John Richards from Wisconsin. That's one of his students that came up to work on the excavation. And on this very day, in fact, when I took this picture, Marla was talking to me, and she said that, do you know of any other places around here that, because I grew up in the Negaunee area, and I did fishing and hunting and trapping and everything else. I spent most of my days out in the woods. And she says, do you know of any other spots that might be similar to what you see here on Teal Lake? And I told her, yeah. I says, Goose Lake. I said, we fished there, we hunt there, we did everything on Goose Lake. I said, there's some beautiful spots there that I'm sure people camped at. And I said, well, I'll go check it out. And there was lake, so in Goose Lake, of course, is located, there. So I went out there and I got in my car. I drove to the boat landing. And this is an archaeological site that it took me 5 seconds to find, because when I opened my car door, laying in the sand were already artifacts in a dirt roadway. And what I did was I just surface collected. I walked down the roads. There's a railroad track that goes through there that they had done work on, and they had dug up on the side of railroad tracks. I just walked along these areas, and there was hundreds and hundreds of artifacts just laying there that nobody had ever recognized before. And again, most all of the artifacts were very, very old. They're very ancient types of quartzite knives, church scrapers, and so on. Looked to be very old. And although these tools were very distinctive, and they were thought to be what we refer to as Paleo-Indian in age, in other words, over 10,000 years old, I never found a spear point, a projectile point that would tell us how old the site was. Now, the reason that's important is because spear points, projectile points, everybody looks at it and they say, well, that's an arrowhead. Well, arrowheads, bows and arrows weren't being used until maybe about 1,500 years ago. Previous to that, they were basically spear points and javelin points, okay? And they changed in style through the years. And if you went back, if you look on the far left there, you can see that if you go back 12 to 13,000 years ago, there was a specific type of spear point that was being used, and they gradually changed over time to where they're very distinctive, and they only show up during that time period. Once that style goes out, it's gone. It's like cars, Once you can tell a car from 1954 by looking at it compared to a car that's from 2024. Even older cars, and they got this tires, they got, maybe somebody would come from space and they wouldn't know, but we know that they're different because they change in style. And the exact same thing happens here. And that bottom photograph there are projectile points and spear points and such that come from here in Marquette County. And it goes from the oldest to the newest, and even the newest ones there are over 5,000 years old. But you can see how they change. Well, anyway, what I had to do was to find one of those spear points to prove it. Anyway, I did the same thing. I went to the news and I said, okay, people have to hear this, they have to understand that. And so this again made the front page of the Mining Journal, and it was the Nagani Man's archaeological find could date back as far as 8,000 BC, and that 8,000 BC means 10,000 years ago, okay? But we had to prove it. Now, by finding a spear point. One of the things that I did was that I knew that, I thought that somebody out there must have found something. Some private citizen out there fishing or doing whatever they were doing had to have come across something. And so one of the things that I did was I let the public know that if anybody had ever found anything that they think may be an artifact, to get a hold of me and I would look at it. And I was hoping that maybe somebody would have provided me with something that was going to be a bingo. And sure enough, you might remember Frank Matthews from Nagani, the historian. Well, he was a friend of mine. He was a great guy. And he really took an interest when he knew that when I found the site on Teal Lake, he was really fired up about that. And he says, he got a hold of me and he said, Jim, he says, I found, he called it an arrowhead. He said, I found an arrowhead years ago on Teal Lake, down by where the beach is today by Lakeview School. I said, really? He said, yeah. He says, next time you're at my museum, I said, well, come over and take a look at it. And there inside this little box, and he had it written on there, arrowhead found at Teal Lake, April 15th, 1959, Nagani, Michigan. And inside that little box you can see there was an incredible Paleo-Indian spear point, a point that dates back to 12 to 11,000 years ago, okay? Now, shortly after I got that information from Frank, I get a call from a guy that I worked with, Brad Waters from Ishpeming. And he says, Jim, he says, I said, it might be an Indian artifact. He said, I think it's a quartz scraper. And that's how he described it to me. He said, when I was fishing up on Silver Lake. I said, well, next time you're in town, just stop by and I'll take a look at it and let you know what it is. Well, sure enough, Brad stops over at the house, and this is the picture I took. He pulls it out of his pocket, and it's this 12 to 11,500-year-old Paleo-Indian called an agate basin point. That's what they're called. That's the name that was given to them. And so I couldn't believe it, because here it was that, I was looking for this direct evidence, this proof that we were here since the Ice Age, and two people show up with points. That to me was proof. There was no doubt in my mind that this is proof that we were here 12,000 years ago. And so what I did was I sent all of this information. I took detailed photographs and drawings, and I talked to both of the people that found things to get they told me their story about how they found it and everything else. I sent all of that stuff down to John Halsey, who was the state archaeologist in 1986. And I got a nice letter back. You can see it's the Waters find spot and the Matthews find spot. And I got a nice thank you letter. And I was thinking, okay, I kind of expected to be carried off by archaeologists on top of their shoulders for being the first person to ever document these ancient points. But the problem was that they were professing that these things didn't exist in the UP. And I was coming forth as this rank amateur archaeologist and saying, no, here it is, here's the proof. Well, I got a hold of Marla, and I said, Marla, I haven't really heard much I haven't heard anything from anybody from the professional world. I said, what's the big deal? I said, I thought this would be like front page news in the Detroit Free Press. And she says, and this is what she told me. She says, I'm going to be honest with you, Jim. She says, there are doubts among professional archaeologists about you as an amateur archaeologist and the Paleo-Indian point discoveries themselves. And I said, well, why? She says, well, can you prove it? I said, I did prove it. I sent down the information. And she says, no. She says, how do you know that they weren't lying to you? How do you know that they were maybe just misrepresenting what they thought they knew? And I said, well, they're honest people. I know them both. They're good people. They're going to be honest with me. And she says, that's not how it works. She said, here's how it works. She says, first of all, you're attempting to show the professional archaeological world that they were wrong, okay? So it's a paradigm. And she says, in a verbal, this is the greatest lesson I ever got in archaeology. And she said, a verbal personal account from, and this is how she said it, from an old man or a fisherman after the discovery, that's evidence. That's evidence, but it's not proof. Written photographic documentation from a professional archaeologist, as he said at the time of the discovery, that's proof. And at first, I was upset. I was a little bit mad. I was thinking, boy, but then I started thinking about what she said, and I thought, she's right. I got to be able to prove it. So I came up with a plan, and this was the plan, and this is, honest to gosh, here's my plan. My plan was to go out and really look now, because now I knew these Paleo-Indian spear points were out there, because two people had brought them to me. And I thought, find it, but leave it there. Don't pick it up. And then immediately contact a professional archaeologist. If you got to grab them by the ear, and then what you got to do is just drag them to that site if you have to drag them, and you make them see it for themselves, okay, laying there. And that was my plan. And well, somebody was on my side when I came up with that plan, because what happened is, in the early 1980s, the Deer Lake Reservoir in Ishpeming was found to be contaminated with mercury. And so the Deer Lake, of course, sits just on the north side of Ishpeming, and it sits just over the hill from Frontier Lake. And what they decided that they were going to do in 1985, they were going to drain the whole basin. And a lot of you might remember that when they did this. And but there was an original Deer Lake, and you can see it in there. It was just a very small lake, a kettle lake that was sitting in there. And it's only a 100-acre lake. But it was a lake that had been formed when the glacier left that area over 12,500 years ago. That lake's been sitting there, okay? And that's what it was. It exposed that lake. Now, in the fall of 1986, John Gordo from Ishpeming, who actually lived close to Deer Lake there, joined up with me, and we went out to try to find, to see what we could find in that basin, thinking that there would have to be probably some sites that were located around that lake. And because there was no water there at the point, just in the lake bed was there, but the basin itself was drained. And if you can see where John is walking there, right now, if that basin was full of water, it would be up over his head where he's walking there. But that's what we were walking along, was the lake bed. And initially we found, sure enough, there were numerous archaeological sites ancient campsites that were located around that lake. And these were some of the ancient stone tools that we found, and they looked to be very, very old, okay? Winter came, so there was nothing we could do. And now something happens on March 21st, 1987. Karen and I were coming back from Marquette. We'd gone to Marquette that morning, and I was coming back, and I just went across the Harp River Bridge, going up the hill towards Negaunee. And I had this, this vision came into my head, into my mind. I don't know how to describe it. And what I saw as I'm driving in the car on that morning was this. I actually saw in my mind a Paleo-Indian spear point laying in the rocks and in the sand. And not only was it a spear point, and Karen can attest to this, I looked at her, I said, we're going to go up to Deer Lake today. We got to get up to Deer Lake, me and John. I said, I'm going to go find a Scotts Bluff spear point. Now, I actually named the type of spear point. Not only did I say a spear point, I named I could see a specific type, a Scotts Bluff 10,000-year-old spear point in my mind. And I actually saw this. And of course, she looked at me like I'm crazy. You know what I mean? She gave me this look like, you what? I said, well, I'm going to go get a hold of John Gordo. I said, we're going to get out there anyway. So I got home. I called John. I said, we got to get out to Deer Lake today. And he says, well, there's still a little bit of snow on the ground. I said, yeah, but there's some bare spots on the other side of the lake. Because you're talking March, okay? And so this is what it looked like. This photo was taken the following day, but this is what the site, what it looked like. There was still snow, but there was these bare spots. And when John and I got to the lake, I picked him up with my truck, and we drove down to the lake, and we got out, and I told John, I said, I'm telling you what we're going to do today. We're going to find a Scotts Bluff spear point. We're going to find them. We're going to prove that people lived here forever. And he goes, he gave me the same look that Karen gave me. You know, he looked at me like, what? A Scotts Bluff spear point, you know? Well, believe it or not, we walk over to the opposite side of the lake. John goes one way, I go another way. I said, let's just keep looking. And John hollers to me, he says, Jim, you got to come see this. And I could tell by the tone of his voice, he was really excited. So I basically ran over to where he was, and he was pointing down at this. Guess what that is? It's a 10,000-year-old Scotts Bluff spear point. And he goes, how did you do that? I went, I don't know how I did that. And then as we were standing there or kneeling there, we looked around, there was all kinds of spear points. I wasn't the only one. He said, here's another one, here's another one, here's another one. So we stood up, and in front of us on the ground, there were numerous 10,000-year-old Scotts Bluff spear points. We did it. We did exactly what I envisioned, and we did it what my spirit quest had me doing. We found the ancient spear point that was going to prove that people lived here. But we had to follow the plan, right? And so one of the hardest things we ever did was we had to leave everything laying there. You see this unbelievable treasure trove of ancient spear points, but you can't pick them up. You can't take them. Because what we had to do was to leave them there and then immediately contact an archaeologist and then drag them out there. And so what I did was we went right back to John's house, and I called Marla Buckmaster. She was actually skiing at Marquette Mountain that day. But I left a message, and I said, Marla, I said, we did it. We found Paleo-Indian spear points on Deer Lake. Well, early the next morning, we headed back to the site with Marla, and she was going to come out to the site. One of the great things growing up in my family was growing up in a traditional Anishinaabe French Indian family. That was my dad all the way. And he was a fisherman, a trapper, a hunter. He was a talented painter. He was a gatherer of whatever mushrooms and berries and stuff. But he was also a professional photographer. And so I got a hold of my dad, and I said, Dad, you ain't gonna believe what we found. I went over to the house, and I said, Dad, get all your cameras. I said, take all the film you got. I said, I want black and white. I want, color, which was Ektachrome 35 millimeter at that time. Nobody had the cameras that we got today. And so I said, we're gonna take pictures of everything. And I said, I'll get my camera, I'll load up my camera as well. And I said, because everything has to be documented. And so my dad was all fired up. And this is one of the first photos he took. It was one of the black and white documentation photos that he took. And that's Marla kneeling down there. John Anderton, who was an archaeologist. He was a student at the time, but passed away when he was at Northern as an archaeologist. That's me standing there. And that's John and Lois Gordo standing there. And what we're doing is we're setting up a boundary around the area where we found all of those surface finds of those spear points. Day one then was all about what Marla had said, proper documentation of the discovery. We had to prove that these things were here. And so it was taking photographs, it was taking measurements, it was doing, documenting in a logbook and so on and so forth, so that we could forever prove that the site was there. And so my plan worked. And so finally I told Marla, I said, okay, pick it up. And that's Marla smiling right there, because she knows she'll be famous for the rest of her life, because she was the professional archaeologist who worked on this incredible discovery that proved that people have lived here for over 10,000 years. And of course, I got to pick up one of these, of course, and hold it in my hand, and that's what I'm holding up there, and that's John Gordo holding it. And I gotta tell you something, I'm gonna give you the opportunity to do it in a while here. When you hold one of these precious, precious things in your hand, knowing that someone was holding this in their hand over 10,000 years ago, it's magic. You can feel it. There's something you can feel in your very heart when you do it. And that's what we felt that day. Well, the next 2 days, day 2 and day 3, we went back there not knowing if anything else was there, because we had surface collected everything, but we didn't do any excavating per se. And we didn't expect to find anything, to be honest with you. But but we hit just absolute pay dirt, because down buried in the soil, were dozens of burnt projectile point fragments. Everything now was broken, had been broken, but it had been burned, okay? And you could tell by looking at it that these artifacts, in a sense, these precious stone tools had somehow been, I'll use the word sacrifice, but had somehow been used by the people, and they intentionally broke them, and they were buried there. Now, Buckmaster at the time was teaching. There was a snowstorm that hit us, all kinds of other stuff that happened. And she was only able to get back on the site for only 5 days total, okay? And it's an absolute shame, because we never got to really finish the excavation. Because the thing I didn't mention is that the dam had been closed on the basin, okay? And so the water was coming up every day. So we were in a race against time to get this excavation completed, to a point where we were satisfied. We never got there. And you can see there on March 22nd, you can see where the water is way back in the original lake. And on May 22nd, there it is, the water's basically in the hole. Well, it's in the hole already. So we were done, okay? John and I didn't rest, however, while we were waiting for Marla. We had this canoe up there, and we searched that entire lake basin, and we found numerous other archaeological sites, and most of them looked to be the same age as the Paleo-Indian in age. In fact, most of the material here, in fact, you can see in that the upper left-hand corner, there's a fragment of a broken projectile point, burnt spear point, and that one was also burnt, but that was on a different site. So we know that there was a lot of activity on that lake, but it filled up with water. But the great thing is that we were able to identify 19 of these late Paleo-Indian early Archaic period points, and there were at least 15 to 18 others that were recognized as individual points from the fragments that were there. So there it is. It was the proof, and finally had the absolute proof that people have lived here for some 10,000 years, okay? Now, the stone tools told us something else, because they always tell you a story. You study the stone tools. Almost all of the spear points, almost every one of them, were made from one kind of stone. It's called Hixton silicified sandstone. It doesn't come from the UP. As the crow flies, Hixton comes from one place on the face of the earth that's 215 miles away from Deer Lake. And that's it's down in Jackson County, down in Wisconsin, okay? This material was coming all the way from there, which told us that so were the people coming from there. Because the other thing that happened when we did our research, there was 2 sites down in Wisconsin, in central Wisconsin, one right by Green Bay and one just to the west. One was called the Pope site. In a farm field, they found exactly what we found on Deer Lake. They found all of these broken, burned Scottsbluff spear points. And then there was the Renier site, which was found up by Green Bay on the Door Peninsula. And they found there exactly what we found. They found all of these burnt Scottsbluff spear point fragments, but they found something else there, and things had been scattered out because things had been laying there for thousands of years, and there was wave action. It was up towards, it was on Lake Michigan. But what they found in there, they found small pieces of calcined, burnt human bone. And what that told them, that what that was a cremation burial, and that was an offering that was made to the people there. And they've since done, there's been a lot of archaeological work, and it's been found that these earliest people, Paleo-Indian peoples in particular, cremated their dead. And when you think about it, it's because these people were traveling vastly. They weren't like, they didn't live in a specific spot. They were nomadic. And so when someone passed away, rather than just leave the body or bury the body and it be open to animals and whatever else, they would burn the body and then they would offer things to that person and they would revisit that spot. And so that was, and so that's one of the things that we don't know. We didn't find any human bone at all on Deer Lake. Everything had been washed away and had been in a lake bed for a century. There was no human bone, but we think that that's probably what that was. But anyway, what that told us was that there was the Paleo-Indian people who were nomadic. They were, at the time that they were living here, it wasn't what it is today. It wasn't the same animals, it wasn't the same trees. The environment was different because it was at the end of the Ice Age. And the animals that would have been here would have been these vast caribou herds. And what we think was because they've got all of these big spear points. A lot of them are thrusting spears. They're not even something you can throw. You got to be close to an animal. And about one of the only animals you can really do that to are caribou. And so it made all the sense in the world that these people were traveling back and forth from down by central Wisconsin. And in their yearly cycle of life here, they were coming up here and they were living here in this area. And of course, they just weren't hunters. In order to survive, you also got to be a forager. You got to be a gatherer. And so there was other things that these people knew what they could eat and how they could survive here in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan back at the end of the Ice Age. And of course, we know that for a fact now that they were here. They were right here in Marquette County. We found the site, the Gordo site. And plus all the other things now made sense. All these other artifacts that we were finding that looked to be that old, it really matched up perfect. And so, and what we know, one of the important things is to understand, and this should be close to everybody's heart here, was that some 10,000 years ago, these people, this family that was living there on Deer Lake, they intentionally burned over 30 precious projectile points. Their very lives depended upon these projectile points that came from over 200 miles away. And it certainly was a sacred ritual. It was a ceremonial activity. It had to be. And that's important to understanding who those people were, because what it tells us is that they were spiritual, that they believed that they were part of something much bigger than themselves, okay? So that's a story that these things tell. Well, of course, the paradigm was finally shattered, okay? Made the front page of the Mining Journal again, and Iron Mountain News and other places, everybody was covering this. And so for the first time, we proved that people had been living here some 10,000 years ago. We were here, and based upon that particular discovery. Well, once again, John and I did not rest because 30 days after that picture, 30 days after that picture of John standing by the hole filled with water, we were up on Silver Lake. I said, let's head up to Silver Lake. That's where Brad Waters said that he found that agate basin spear point. So that's where we headed next. And luckily for us, the water levels were very, very low in 1987. There was a regional drought that had occurred in 85, 86, and 87. So that all of the lake levels, even your inland lake levels, everything was down low. And these basins were naturally low just because of that drought that had occurred. And so there was a lot of areas up on Silver Lake that we could check out. And lo and behold, on the very first day that we got up to Silver Lake, we found another Scotts Bluff campsite. And we found everything was eroded. Okay, it was the same thing that being in the other basin on Deer Lake. Everything's eroded out. But laying in this area were all of these artifacts. And one of the artifacts that tells us who was there and what was there is that one that I have the circle on right there. And what that is that's the very base, a broken base of a Scotts Bluff spear point. Exactly what we found on Deer Lake. And that's got a story to tell too, because it's not, when you study that, the base itself, it's got what they call a transverse snap break with an impact fracture scar. And that kind of a break only occurs one way, and that's if that, boom, if that spear point is jammed into something and it hits something hard and it snaps, and it also hits so hard that it actually pushes back on the rock and takes off that impact fracture. So somebody, when they were using that, must have really jammed that hard, must have hit a shoulder blade or hit something, but it snapped off. The rest of the point was left in the animal. Now, they were no different than we are today. Because I don't know if anybody in your bow hunts, I've been a bow hunter my entire life. Whenever you got an arrow and you got a broadhead, you got your point. You go through a lot of points, but you always save your shaft, you always save your arrow, because you can bring that back and you put on a new arrow point or a new projectile point. They were no different. And undoubtedly what happened here was one of the things you're going to find on campsites, you're going to find a lot of broken projectile points. You're going to find the bases because they came back to the site, they untied that piece, they took a new one, they put it in there, they tied it on, and they were good to go again. And so that's what that was, and that was a bingo. Now, here's another story. Hope you believe me, because it's honest to God truth. 1988, we returned to the site, to Silver Lake. The water was still down at that point. It started to come up, but it was still down. And John and I were in a canoe, and we were going to canoe up to the west end, the far west end of the lake. You could drive to the east end, but you had to go all the way up to the west end. It was quite a distance to go. And we were going to go check and look for sites on the west end. On our way up there, there's an island that sat in the middle of a piece of highland, but it's an island that was sitting in the middle of the basin. And I looked at that island as we were canoeing past it, and in my mind, I had a vision, and a thought came into my head again, a picture, and I could see it as plain as day in my mind. And what it was a very extremely old Paleo-Indian artifact, similar to the one that Brad Waters had found in Agate Basin Point. And I told John again, I said, John, I said, stop on the island. I said, there's a Paleo-Indian spear point laying in the rocks up there. I can see it. I know it's there. And he's going, he's in the back of the canoe, you know, and I'm in the front, and he's looking at me, he says, like I'm nuts. And I said, no, I'm serious. He says, there's nothing on that island. He said, let's just keep going where we're going to go. I said, all right. So we went up, when we went up to the other end, we did our work there. And on the way back, I said, you got to stop. You got to stop on the island. I said, I'm telling you right now. He says, I'll tell you what, I'll stop. He says, but I'll bet you anything there's nothing there. I'll bet you anything. I said, I'll bet you $1. What are you going to bet? Eh? I said, I'll bet you $1. He says, all right, let's stop there. Let's stop on the island. We pull up onto the island. Right there is what the island looks like as you're looking, you know, to the north. This is from the south to the north. You can see our canoes over here. And we walked across that, and you can see where the yellow bag there, my shoulder bag that is sitting there. And guess what's sitting there? It was another find of a lifetime. It was exactly what I had seen in my mind. It was this incredible 11,500 to 11,000-year-old Paleo-Indian, made from Hickston again. It's called a Hellgap spear point, very, very similar to an agate basin. In fact, I thought it was an agate basin, but I found out later it's called a Hellgap, a little bit different. But anyway, it's exactly what I saw. And John looked at me, and he says, how did you do that? And I said, I don't know. I said, but you owe me $1. And I said, no one's ever going to believe this story. I said, take out your $1 and hold it by the point. And that's the photo that I could serve as proof that I'm not BSing you on this whole story. And John said, I can't. He said, you did that twice now. I said, well, I don't know how I did it. I said, I don't know that. I said, I just did it. We were here not only 10,000 years ago, but now we had documented proof because we photographed it. We did everything correct that we're supposed to do before we picked it up. Had all the documentation, all properly documented. That was over 1,000 years older than what we had found on Deer Lake. So it was just absolutely incredible, okay? And then what we did was we discovered and documented then in 87, 88, 10 additional archaeological sites on the Silver Lake Basin. And then, of course, we couldn't get back up there because then the water came up and everything was filled again. In 1988, Marla and I then co-authored a paper to spread the word to the archaeological world of professionals out there that we have been here in the Upper Peninsula since the end of the Ice Age. And we wrote this article in the Wisconsin Archaeologist. It was called the Gordo Site, Preliminary Report on the Late Paleo-Indian Site in Marquette County, Michigan. Okay, so that was extremely important to get that out to the professional world. And then Calvin Clark, who was another archaeologist, he was, at the time he was at Michigan State University, He had the whole rest of all the other things that we collected up on Deer Lake, and he wrote a research report on all of that. It was called Plano Tradition Lithics from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We're talking Plano, that refers to the people that would have been living here 10 to 12,000 years ago, okay? So we covered it. And so we got the word out. And then that was it for several years. I continued to get out and try to look around and try to find things. But in 1993, something really good happened in a sense. And that was the Upper Peninsula Power Company was in the process of relicensing all of their dam sites here in Marquette County on the Dead River. They had to get it relicensed through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, through FERC. And so what they did was they had to go up there and do an assessment. And I'll read this. It says, UPCO contracted the Institute of Minnesota Archaeology to conduct an on-site archaeological assessment of the Silver Lake Basin. Okay. Now, and here's what they were told to do. This is what their plan was. And I'm going to read this. The ancient sites discovered by Paquette during the mid to late 1980s represents the earliest evidence of human occupation in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Because of the importance of this discovery, the Michigan State Historic Preservation Office requested that archaeological reconnaissance be conducted around the shores of Silver Lake to determine whether any additional sites were present. The objective of the study, of the survey, therefore, was to determine whether any previously unreported archaeological resources were present at the Silver Lake Basin. Okay. Now, there was a problem. They were going to go up there and they were going to do their survey with the water still up. The water was still high, whereas almost all of the sites that we had found were down lower than this. And so what they did was they agreed to lower it like 3 feet, okay? And they consulted with John Halsey, UPCO did, because they didn't want to lower the basin. But they had to do this. They had to do this archaeological study. And they got a hold of Dr. John Halsey, the state archaeologist, and they said, well, just go ahead and do it, whatever. And it said that it's too expensive to draw down the lake. And I thought, expensive? All you do is you pull the plug on the dam, right? But anyway, it was too expensive, they said. So they went ahead and they hired this firm to come in there and to do their survey. And again, it was conducted solely in the high energy erosion zones of the basin perimeter, is where they did their study. And there was another even bigger problem. They had no experience whatsoever in working on upper Great Lakes archaeology. In fact, one of them who was on the team there had just come from Eastern Europe. And this was the first job that he was working on. He could hardly even speak English. And he was here working on this archaeological site. But they failed to recognize, they had no idea that people here, especially the oldest stuff, had used quartzite. They didn't even, we went out there one day because they said, well, we're not finding anything. So Marla and I drove up there, and I knew that there was a lot of artifacts on the sites because I had been there previously, and everything was left there for them to find. They just walked right over it. Didn't even recognize it. So we pointed it out to them. And anyway, might as well forget it. Here's what they wrote. Here's their final report. They said, during the initial walkover of the shoreline, it was clear that high water levels were obscuring areas of interest. Yeah, no kidding. Of particular importance was the observation that the water levels were still considerably higher, between 3 to 4 feet than they had been in 87, 88, and that there was far more sand buildup on some of the sites that had been previously found. And there were certain sites that were still inundated during the entire course of the project, so they never even got to them, okay? But they wrote this conclusion. Although field conditions were sometimes not ideal, no kidding, we believe that any additional sites comparable to those discovered by Paquette would have been discovered by the survey. Based on the absence of any such sites, we conclude that Paquette's initial study identified all of the primary archaeological properties immediately adjacent to the lake. Because of the massive disturbance that has taken place in the Silver Lake Basin, it is our opinion that none of the sites, either individually or as a group, are eligible for listing on the National Register. The old Vista Theater in Nagani is, by the way, but that ain't. In other words, our ancestors didn't matter in the least to the powers that be. They came in and they relicensed, the federal government allowed them to relicense, and the state of Michigan just stood there with their whatever. And I was thinking, how could they have found nothing? I showed them where things were. So in July, I returned to the Silver Lake site. It was a site that was included in their survey. And I immediately located a large surface concentration of late Paleogene stone artifacts lying in an eroded area that they had searched and concluded that nothing was there. These things were laying right on the surface, and they said there's nothing there. And not only were these just stone artifacts, again, this was a campsite. And there was a broken base and a broken tip from a Scottsbluff Cody spear points, okay? This was a tip and a base. They're sitting right there, made out of Hickston silicified sandstone. Too bad. 1996, Marla and I, what we did was to at least prove to the world that things were up on Silver Lake. What we did was we wrote a report. Western Michigan University is the one who published this. It's called Surface Indications of a Late Pleistocene, which means late ice age, and early Holocene, which means early on after the ice left at Silver Lake, Marquette County. And we reported on all of the sites. But I got to show you this. This always cracked me up. Investigating the archaeological record of the Great Lakes State. Is there anything missing on that picture up there? Do you see the Great Lakes State? Is there like maybe only half of the Upper Peninsula on the Great Lakes State? Answer is yes. I'm thinking, that's about it from them, from down there. The trolls were taking care of us right there. Anyway, what we did in this for the very first time, what Marla and I did was we took what we found and we developed this chronological sequence of ancient UP paleo peoples, the occupations that they coincided with the sequence of the melting ice sheet. That there was things that we knew about the advancing ice and how it melted. And that the ages of these spear points were the same ages of some of these events that were occurring, that had occurred. In other words, what I'm talking about is like, for example, like the Paquette Basin Point, that's 12,000, 11,500 years old. That's somebody was living there immediately after the ice had melted away from the UP. Okay, and that's the time period when the first people would have been coming here. So they could actually get here because of the ice being gone. The Hell Gap Point, which is a little bit, it's not quite as old, but it's almost as old. That's the time period when that ice actually re-advanced, and the glacier came back into the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and it covered portions of the UP. In fact, where we're sitting today, we'd be under that ice sheet. Marquette was under this ice sheet. But the ice never encroached upon Teal Lake, Goose Lake, Deer Lake, and Silver Lake. It stopped on these hills. When you look up at the hills here, that's a big glacial moraine that you see where that glacier stopped. And it melted away, and it never came back, okay? And that's what happened, and that's what the Cody Scottsbluff people that were living here, they were here after that ice finally left and was finally gone, and it's in where we are today. It just melted off into Canada, okay? Now, in 2002, there was a planned dam repair and a dike modification, and you might remember this. Think about the date, 2002. It was, they decided that they were going to put in this new dike, this plug, what they call the plug that was going to go into that dike. And they lowered it for the first time so that all of the previously documented sites that I had documented previously, they were all exposed again. I never thought this would ever happen. And so I jumped in my truck and I drove up to the lake, and believe me, all I could think about was what they wrote on the bottom there. We conclude that Paquette's initial study identified all of the primary archaeological properties immediately adjacent to the lake. And I just stepped on the gas, and I couldn't get there fast enough because I knew what I was going to find. And at that point, I had a two-part plan. It was no longer a three-part plan. I knew how to document these things. And that was, number one, was to find it and professionally document it, and then forward all site documentation to our state archaeologists and the State Historic Preservation Office to make them fully aware of the cultural sites that they agreed with UPCO never existed on that basin. And I'm going to read this because it puts it all into perspective. During a 3-month window of opportunity in 2002, I logged over 1,000 miles driving back and forth to the Silver Lake Basin. I walked over 200 miles conducting on-site surveys. I documented new discoveries over 300, with other discoveries, with over 300 digital and 35 millimeter photographs. I finally had a digital camera. But I doubled every picture I took, and also, I didn't trust the digital camera, so I used the digital, plus I also used my 35 millimeter. I revisited all of the previously documented sites, and I submitted detailed documentation on 16 sites to the Office of the State Archaeologist. That included 10 new sites that they said never existed. I also did this. because they had this really crappy way of documenting sites. They had this paper form that you had to like fill out. It was like, it was just a bunch of baloney. And so what I did was, I was pretty good on a computer back then, and I developed an electronic version of this outdated hard copy state site form, and I submitted detailed documentation of 16 archaeological sites to the U.S., to the Office of State Archaeologists with those 10 new sites. And this is how I documented it. I could include photographs, maps, everything on these sites. They had never seen nothing like that before. But I wanted to make sure that they knew that they were wrong. Well, you'd think that all good things come to an end. And 2002, I put my time in there and the water had come back up. But lo and behold, someone was still on my side. And you know what happened in 2003, right? The dike, the fuse plug that they put into that dike went pop, it popped out. And the lake, the whole basin drained. And I'm thinking, you know, I think there was a power behind this. There was something else that was going on up there, that somebody was really on my side. And I don't know that, but it's just odd that that happened. And so it collapsed and it completely drained everything. Well, guess what? From 2003 to 2010, when it refilled, I visited, revisited, and then revisited every previously documented site. And then I, again, submitted detailed, updated documentation to the state of Michigan as these sites get now exposed, but they began to weather away, okay, through erosion, through rain and everything else. And so what I was trying to do was trying to get professional archaeologists to get up there, get off their dead rear ends and get up there and do some work. Because all I was doing was surface collecting. I wasn't doing any excavating. I was there and all I could do was surface collect. I didn't have permission to go up there and excavate, but I had permission to go up there and surface collect. I provided the Michigan OSA and SHPO with detailed documentation for 27 additional new archaeological sites that they said never existed. And that's a photograph of just one, of artifacts that came off of just one site, and it's a site that dated back around between 8,000 and 9,000 years old. It's called an early archaic site. I included in my state reports, again, maps, photographs of all the site locations, and I documented, I had documentation of all of the artifacts that were laying there. I made these detailed, these are some of the detailed site maps, documentation maps that I submitted down to Lansing, so that anybody could go back there and see exactly where I was. I carefully documented for the state of Michigan hundreds of newly exposed cultural artifacts. I took detailed notes, photographs, and I very, very carefully documented all of the find spots of all of the projectile points. I knew how important that was with GPS readings and so on. Dr. John Anderton from Northern became one of my best friends. We were up on that, we went up to the lake and we made detailed archaeological maps, site maps of 30 of the sites that were up there. Then in 2004, Anderton and Bob Reedus from NMU and myself, we further explored the connections between all of these Marquette County ancient 10 to 12,000 year old Palean sites with the known glacial events. And of course, we were able to, what we knew was that these people were living right here in Michigan throughout this terminal phase of the Ice Age. And you can see, there we see that lines there, you see it says Outer Marquette Moraine. That's the advance of that last glacier 11,500 years ago that covered Marquette. But all of these people were coming here and they were camped out on these lakes here that sat on the edge of that glacier, but that glacier also act as barriers for these huge caribou herds, okay? Caribou couldn't go any farther north than right here. And so the people were just taking advantage of that. Now, just a couple other things here. I'm only gonna talk about a couple of the sites, but I wanna show you just a small part of what I found up there. Back in 1988, what I did was when I registered this site, most of the sites that I registered in 88, there was quite a few things there. This one, there hardly was anything there, but I documented it anyway, because what I saw there, now you're looking at this and you're saying, well, that looks like a bunch of rocks. Well, it is a bunch of rocks. But that's fire-cracked rock, that's the remains of a hearth. And once you know what you're looking at, you can easily tell that most of all of that rock in that photograph had been, they had been burned, and they had been modified into taking the shape and in the color and everything else that had happened. So, but this site wasn't, and that was the photograph that I took back with my camera back in 1988. In 2003, in May, when it washed out, I decided I was going to revisit and see if I could find that hearth again. And this is a picture of me. Karen took this photo of me. We were up there walking the shoreline, and I'm pointing over to where that site was. where this, I call it the Silver Lake number 9 site. That was just the name that I gave to the site, and I gave it a number. And I'm pointing to it, and I went over to it, and sure enough, they're laying there, and everything you see a little star on there. Believe me when I tell you this, that's a piece of fire-cracked rock. That's just not a rock. That's the hearth that I had seen back in 1988. And so I just began to look around, and that site was filled with surface artifacts. They were everywhere. That he had eroded out, and they were everything was sitting on the surface. This is just a small part of the collection that came from that particular site. And what it was a base camp. It was a Paleo-Indian base camp where they had been set up there, probably revisited numerous times in their journeys here. And they camped in that one spot because it's a beautiful spot. If you saw it, it was just a beautiful spot. It overlooked the lake outlet. And of course, I knew how old it was because, bingo, there it is again. There's another Scottsbluff spear point that was laying there right on the surface. It was actually in 2 pieces. And I picked up, one piece was here, the other piece was there, and I thought, oh my God, there's a God in heaven, these are going to fit. It went, boop, they fit. So, but that's what it was. It had been broken, it had been broken when they were resharpening it. I could actually tell what happened was that when there's a certain flake that when they tried to take that flake off, it broke the spear point right in half. So you probably would have heard some Paleo-Indian swearing at that point if he was a hunter like me at that point, because that was a bad loss for them. But here's the other thing. There was a lot of times when a spear point would either break or when you would you would use it to the point where you couldn't use it as a spear point anymore. This rock, all of this stone that you see here, it's all coming from Wisconsin. They're carrying it up here, and if it's coming as a finished artifact, they're still carrying it. And so what they did was they would refurbish, particularly the point blade section in particular, and they would reuse it as a knife. You could actually reuse it as a scraper, and you go from a hunting tool to a domestic tool, okay? And it was very common back then. And you can see here that there's the 2 points on the left, the 2 pieces. One is, both of them had been exactly the same as that point, that bigger point there. Those are Scottsbluff spear points. The bases were broke off, but they still continued to use the blade section. The other one on your right over there, that's a really cool one because that was a Scottsbluff spear point. But when you sharpen a spear point, you sharpen it by taking off flakes off the edges. And eventually, spear points is this wide, and pretty soon it's like this. If it doesn't break, it gets to the point where it's very small. But you don't have to throw it away, and what they did here was they used that, then they made a drill out of it, a piercing tool. And again, it became a domestic tool. It was, and you can see what they did here with that tool. So it's telling you that you're on a campsite that people were really making extensive use out of, okay? And it was a family base camp that had been used there. So now, one more site I'm going to talk about here. And that was, you can see where the Silver Lake number 9 was over on the lake, the current lake, okay? And I'm going to talk about another site that we found up there. It's called Sandpoint 2, and it's located, to the west. You're looking towards Lake Superior. It's a flyover with a friend of mine. And there's another site called Sandpoint 2 that sits on this nice sandy knoll. Beautiful, you see the sand, it's all exposed as sand there. And this is one of the documentation photos that I sent along with the site forms that I sent down to Lansing so that they knew everything that was going on there. This is the surface collection, okay? Again, looks like a bunch of rocks, right? And but contained in those photos, one of the most common artifact you're going to find in any site is the flake debris, okay? You're going to find flakes, and you're going to find the stone tools. The stone tools are, in a sense, relatively rare compared to all of the other junk you're going to find, all the other stuff that they're just discarding. This is very typical of what you're going to find on any archaeological site. Vast majority of that stone doesn't come from the UP, okay? No, these are some of those artifacts. They're just incredible. And again, it's material that's not coming from here. Now, how old is the site? Well, here we go again. This was an amazing discovery on this site. Laying almost together was fragments of 3 miniature agate basin points. And again, if you compare over here, maybe they broke when they were making them or whatever they were doing, and I only found the base of 2 of them. I didn't do any digging again. I had to wait till the wind blew the sand off before I could pick these up. but they're exactly the same as the point that Brad Waters found. But these are miniature ones. They're symbolic. Why they made these and how they made these, no one will ever know. But again, they're 12,000 years old. And then finally, I really hit the jackpot here. It was one of my last visits to that site. The water was coming up. They'd already gotten permission to put the water back, and I'll talk about that in a second here. But I was looking for this more than anything. I wanted to find something that was older than anything else, because a lot of the stuff that came off this site looked to even be older than the Agate Basin stuff. And sure enough, there laying in the sand was just the base, and had been burned. This had also been fragmented, had been burned. But it was enough to tell us what it was, and it's called a plain view type point. That's the name of that. And they date back to 12,000 years, okay? So this is probably the oldest artifact that we know of, that you can prove that came off of the lake. But it's 12,000 years old that somebody was there, okay, and they left that behind. The other thing, the story what it tells you is like almost all of that rock that came from these sites, they're coming from Wisconsin again. It's from people that are, these nomadic people that are traveling back and forth, throughout the course of during this time period. The Jasper Taconites coming from the west, actually coming from the Minnesota area, Hickston, Moline Church, Galena Church. That stuff's coming from way to the south of here, that these people are carrying them. But what this was again, it was proof, archaeological proof, that we were here. We've been here forever, been here ever since the ice melted, we've been here, okay? And so that's what was important about that. And of course, what I tried to do was to, I really wanted, I could see that the professionals weren't going to really go up there and do any work. This is going to be bad. And I know that sooner or later they were going to get relicensed again. But I was hoping that all of the information I sent down to Lansing would have some impact on something. And of course, what I wanted to do was also to educate the public. I wanted to keep people aware here in these communities that we have always been here. That our history here didn't begin when they discovered iron ore in Negaunee, you know what I mean, which is what some people would think. Our history here as a people went 12,000 years back. We've always been here, okay? And so it was important to let that be known. But it was sad for me because as I revisited these sites, nothing else was happening, except the wind was blowing, the rain was coming, the winters came, and everything was eroded out, and a lot of anything that was in any archaeological context, in a sense, was being destroyed. Okay, just by the erosion that was occurring, and it was not only by the erosion, but it was also by Wisconsin Electric, because they are up there just running amok through these sites. Where you see that, where my hat is sitting there on that, that's actually a spear that I'm holding there. That's where I found that one Scottsbluff spear point on Silver Lake number 9. Nobody went back there to ever look, ever do any excavating. They went in there with a huge excavator and pushed everything out into the lake bed. They just completely destroyed that site. And it was hard for me to take. Now, they had to do another study before they refilled for FERC again. Now, listen to this. And it says on there, it was a phase 2. That means they were going to actually go up there and do what they were supposed to go do, is real extensive survey work and maybe some excavating if they could. And it was for the National Register of Historic Places. It's an evaluation for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And here's what I wrote. In his February 2009 report, prior to the refilling of the reservoir, after that failed dike was replaced, Alan Van Dyke, who was the chief archaeologist, wholly supported and quoted over and over again the findings of the failed 1993 survey report that we proved was false. And that conclusion was, if you can remember, it says, although field conditions were sometimes not ideal, we believe that any additional sites comparable to those discovered by Paquette, those 11 sites, would have been discovered by the survey. Based on the absence of any such sites, we conclude that Paquette's initial study identified all of the primary archaeological properties immediately adjacent to the lake. That's what the state accepted, that's what the federal government accepted. Here's the number of sites. That's a map that shows you over 50 archaeological sites that I documented on that particular lake. And you've only seen just a part of it. It's one of the densest concentrations of recorded and documented Paleo-Indian sites in all of North America. It's not only something that's key to us here, it's one of the most important archaeological regions in all of North America. However, no further professional archaeological work or site preservation was ever deemed necessary on the Silver Lake Basin by our own Michigan Office of State Archaeologists and our State Historic Preservation Office. And the Silver Lake Reservoir was refilled, in which it is to this day. And to them, we didn't matter. We didn't matter one bit. And all of these things you see here, these precious objects that you see here, didn't mean anything to these people. And it really taught me, and I really know, and I know this through doing this for the last 40 years, that laws don't protect our cultural resources, people do. And I know that this inspiration that my grandfather gave to me, it was, if it wasn't for him, this stuff wouldn't have happened, because he's the one that led me to all of this. And I want to read this, and that's just in closing here. I wrote an article called Burning Desire, My Search for Early Man in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. And I wrote this article for Lake Superior magazine. It was published actually before even the Silver Lake project was done. But it was my thoughts on why, they wanted to know why I was doing what I was doing. And I wrote this, but I'm going to read this to you because it pretty much says it all. It says, "We have learned a lot since the search began. The doors of scientific inquiry through which we can gaze back into the mists of time are open. But because the quest for such knowledge is never ending, I, for one, will continue to roam the wooded shorelines of our ancient inland lakes and streams in search of answers to the mysteries of our past. Perhaps it is the nature of humanity that compels me to seek out the shadowy spirit of those long-vanished cultures, hoping that they will share with me their intimate knowledge of what it was like to have lived in a world that was unspoiled by the excesses and byproducts of human greed. I must admit that I have felt their presence as I trudged through the pathless woods along ancient trails that once belonged to my own Indian forebears. I stood amidst the time-honored remains of their campsites and could not help but hear the distant echoes of laughing children, or catch the momentary whiff of smoke emanating from the perpetual glowing embers of their phantom hearths. I watched the setting sun slip beneath the crystal waters of the Grand Lac Superior, and in the shimmering ripples of the passing waves, I glimpsed the reflective glow of my grandfather's soul shining forth in the lodge of Kitchimanatu. And as I've reached down to pick up a long-lost stone spear point from the drifting sands, I have felt in my heart a oneness with the ancient hunter who clasped this thing of beauty in his own hands so many, many lifetimes ago. Such thoughts are the true rewards of my search. And so, in closing, understand this about these artifacts. These are gifts. These are the only way that our ancestors can communicate with us today is through the things that they left for us, and that is these artifacts. We have to study them. We have to learn from them. We have to share that knowledge that we gain. Because it is only through these wonderful gifts, and these are gifts. I look at these things as gifts. They're not just artifacts. They're not just archaeological treasures. They're gifts. That's how they speak to us about their lives. We got to listen. And what they've told us, what they have told us here, that we as a people have been here forever. We've been here since the end of that ice age. And with that, miigwech merci. Thanks for listening. What I brought along is some of these artifacts. Now, they're not going to be with me for long because I've already worked. The Silver Lake materials have been in my basement for years. I used to donate everything to NMU, but when Marla Buckmaster retired from NMU, she took this vast collection of archaeological artifacts that were from Marquette County here, including the Gordo site collection, and shipped them down to Lansing, to the very people who couldn't give a rat's rear end about us up here. And so that's where those artifacts are. So I refused. There was no place else to really give put these artifacts except in the totes in our basement that Karen's reminded me about for years. But I finally made arrangements with the Marquette Regional History Center, and these artifacts are going to be, because they had professional curation places there, and they're just outstanding at honoring these things and understanding what they are. So I told them I didn't want to give it to them until after I gave this talk here, because I wanted to bring some of these artifacts here that you could actually go up there and see and touch and feel for yourself what it's like to actually do it. And so, but very shortly, in the material will be at the Regional History Center. It's going to be there for study so that people, because I've offered these to other universities down in Lower Michigan, I got a zero interest in it. And that's okay. But they're going to be up here for study, for future study. We're already talking about programs that are going to be, that we're going to get study programs, research programs with these things. And eventually, these artifacts are also going to be displayed, just like they've got displays there. If you've ever been to the Marquette Regional History Center, you really need to go there and see what they got set up there and how they really honor these things and they respect these things. And that's one of the things I was looking for more than anything, that you got to respect these. These aren't just rocks. These are gifts to us from our ancestors. And so you have to prove to me that that's what you're going to do, and they have proven that to me. But before I do that, I just want to come up there and we go over and take a look at them if you want, and you've got an opportunity just to lay your hand on any of these. Okay? Any questions?
Very nice.
Thank you. Miigwech. That wasn't bad.